Hey guys, welcome back to Beauty and the Beasts, where we do a little skincare and share a little spooky story. So grab your favorite serum, your mask, a blanket, and settle in. Tonight we're talking haunted hospitals, boarding school warnings, and one very disturbing encounter involving something you definitely don't want to see in your bathroom stall. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, some stories have a way of making you think twice about what's real and what's just waiting. Ready? Let's get into it. So have you heard stories about haunted hospitals? Places like Gunjeom Psychiatric Hospital in Korea, or others whose names are passed down with a kind of reverence. Not because people admire them, but because people fear them. These places carry stories, and over time, those stories become legend. But those are the kinds of tales that feel distant, impersonal. But it's different when the story comes from someone close. When someone says, I know someone who went through this, or this happened to me. That's when it starts to feel real. Today's story came from Reddit. The user didn't share his real name, so we'll call him Mike. Mike lived in Singapore. He never mentioned the name of his school or the neighborhood he lived in, but he described the school as fairly modern, not prestigious, just a decent institution with students who genuinely cared about learning. Mike was the social type. He got along with everyone. Among those he was close to was his physics teacher. His teacher was a middle-aged man with a rounded belly and an easy, unbothered smile. The kind of smile that just made it hard to dislike him, even if you didn't respect him. The students used to joke that he wasn't the best teacher, that they couldn't follow a thing he said, that physics with him was more about enduring the class than learning anything useful. Still, he showed up every day. He taught what he knew, and he never gave up on trying to connect with his students. Eventually, he found a way to get their attention by telling stories, spooky stories. So when he noticed his class starting to drift, when the heat and silence started to settle in like a fog, he'd pause and casually ask, have you ever heard any ghost stories about a hospital? And it worked. The room would quiet down, heads would lift, he had their full attention. And then he would begin. This story came from someone I know, he'd say. It's not mine, but I can promise you one thing. After hearing it, you won't sleep easy tonight. The story took place at the old KK hospital, the version that existed before the sleek, well-lit place we know now. The person who experienced this was someone the teacher knew personally, a woman who worked as a receptionist at the hospital. Her role was what you would expect: administrative work, managing data, greeting patients. Her days were structured, routine, and predictable. One evening, she was assigned to the night shift, a time slot many people don't particularly enjoy. Not necessarily because of the workload, but because of the atmosphere. Hospitals at night are different. Quieter, yes, but also heavier. Like the air moves slower, like time doesn't quite pass the way it should. Her station was on the same floor as the delivery rooms. It was common after birth for nurses to transport soiled sheets, bloodied linens, cloths used during delivery to a collection point for disposal. It wasn't unusual to see a cart rolling down the corridor stacked with used bedding. That night started like any other. But that day, that one particular day, something was different. The receptionist noticed that the sheets being brought out from the delivery ward were almost clean. Not spotless, of course, but strangely absent of blood. So she paused for a moment, thinking it over. Maybe it was a slow day, maybe not many births had taken place. She brushed the thought aside and returned to her paperwork. Later that night, a nurse stopped by her desk to chat, small talk, a distraction from the monotony of the shift. As they spoke, the receptionist casually asked, "Not many births today, right?" But instead of a nod, she was met with silence. The nurse looked at her, confused. "What are you talking about?" she said with a light chuckle. "I just helped deliver a healthy baby boy this afternoon. It was chaos." The receptionist blinked. That wasn't what she expected to hear. She was sure. She had seen the linen cart. It barely had any blood on it. But maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe the delivery was easier than usual. Maybe there hadn't been as much bleeding. It happens. So she just let it go. But the same thing happened again the next night, and the night after that. Each evening, she watched nurses roll out carts of used linens with barely a stain. And each time she asked about it, the answer was always the same. "Yeah, we had a birth today. Twin girls, actually. Big delivery, lots of screaming." And still, the sheets came out clean. It began to bother her now, a quiet, steady unease. Eventually, she couldn't take it anymore. She decided to see it for herself. One night, during her shift, she waited. She watched, made sure no one was nearby. And when the next cart came rolling past, stacked high with linen from a supposedly chaotic delivery, she slipped away from her desk and followed it. The nurse didn't notice. No one did. She followed at a distance, watched the cart disappear into the side corridor into one of the older parts of the building. The hallway there was darker, it was quieter, and it led to a storage room, a place where used linens were gathered before disposal. She expected to find a pile of stained sheets, maybe a nurse on duty, maybe nothing at all. Instead, she found something else. The room was cold, not by temperature, but by atmosphere. The kind of cold that touches your skin without needing wind or air. And there, in the dim light, she saw her, a woman dressed in white, not a nurse, not a patient. She was tall but hunched slightly forward. Her long hair hung in uneven strands, tangled and matted, falling over her face and down her chest. Her skin was pale, almost colorless, and her body, it wasn't fully there. From the waist down, the figure faded, like smoke in a draft. There were no feet, just a hint of shape dissolving into the dark. The receptionist stood frozen in the doorway. The woman didn't move at first, but then slowly she turned her head. No clear face, just dark hair shifting as she moved. The woman crouched low, closer to the pile of sheets, and then with a slow, deliberate movement brought one to her mouth. She began to lick it. There wasn't a sound, no chewing, no slurping, just a slow drag of a tongue over blood-soaked cloth. And then she paused. Her head turned slightly, the posture changed, alert now. As if she had just noticed she wasn't alone. The receptionist stood paralyzed, heart pounding in her ears. The room spun, her hands trembled, her mind fought to make sense of what she was seeing. It took everything she had to move, but when she finally could, she ran. She didn't scream, she didn't look back. She just ran down the hallway, past the nurse's station, all the way to the front where the lights were bright and the voices familiar. The receptionist later confided in the teacher, her acquaintance, that after that night, she found it increasingly difficult to return to work. Something about the hospital no longer felt the same. The corridors were colder. Even the fluorescent lights seemed dimmer. She never went near that side of the building again. But what's interesting is that the story didn't end in Singapore, because similar things, uncanny, quiet horrors, don't just happen in one place. So this next one takes us far from the modern wards of the city to rural Indonesia, in central Java to be exact. The name of this village remains unknown, but in the middle of that quiet place was a religious institution, an Islamic boarding school. The kind where people of all ages came to study, to pray, to find meaning in God. Their lives followed a rhythm, wake before sunrise, perform morning prayers, sweep the grounds, wash clothes. The children would attend school during the day, help with chores in the afternoon, and then gather to study the Quran. There are many ghost stories passed around in boarding schools like these, do's and don'ts, whispered from one student to another. Some were dismissed as superstition, others weren't spoken of twice. And this particular story follows a girl named Nina. She had just turned 17. She'd been at the school since she was 12, long enough to hear all the stories, long enough to stop believing them. Whenever someone brought them up, warnings about unclean things, forbidden corners of the dormitory, of spirits that lingered, she would just smile politely and move on. They were just stories, she thought, things meant to scare children. That day, however, Nina got her period. It was the first day, and it was heavy, painfully so. Her back ached and her abdomen throbbed. She carried on. She swept the dormitory floor, carried water, washed clothes. Though she couldn't touch the Quran during her cycle, she still kept busy, reading books, helping the Ibu Asrama, the dormitory mother. In Indonesia, it's customary for girls to use sanitary pads. Most will wash the used pads before throwing them away, not just for hygiene, but out of deep-rooted cultural beliefs. They make sure all visible blood is gone before disposal. And that afternoon, Nina changed her soaked pad and made her way to the shared bathroom. But when she turned the faucet, nothing came out. The water tank had run dry. She stood there for a moment, frustrated. The bathroom smelled faintly of antiseptic and earth. The afternoon heat made everything feel sticky. Thinking the water would return soon, she made a quick decision. She left the bloodied pad in the squat toilet bowl, shut the lid, and locked the bathroom from the outside. Just for a while, she told herself, I'll clean it later. But the hours passed, the dorm grew louder. There were visitors, more activity than usual. And Nina forgot. She didn't remember until a friend quietly pulled her aside. Nina, did you ever clean that pad you left in the bathroom? Nina blinked, surprised by the question. Oh no, I completely forgot, she said with a soft laugh. But her friend didn't smile. She stopped what she was doing and turned toward Nina, her voice low now. Are you serious? She asked. You know the stories about this place, right? Nina's smile faded. She looked at her friend, who was now standing still, fully facing her. What? It's just a rumor, right? Nina laughed, brushing it off as if the idea didn't concern her in the slightest. Her voice was casual, almost dismissive, like someone mocking a story they heard too many times. But her friend didn't laugh. She didn't even blink. Her face stayed still, eyes fixed, mouth shut tight. There was something uneasy in her expression, something unspoken. It wasn't a joke to her. All right, Nina finally said with a shrug. I'll go clean it and throw it out properly. But come with me so you will know I actually did it this time. Her friend hesitated, then nodded. They went together just after Maghrib, the twilight hour. In Indonesia, that time of day carries weight. The sun has just set. The light has thinned. And tradition holds that this is the hour when the unseen begins to rise. Spirits. The thin veil between this world and another starts to slip. The two girls made their way quietly through the boarding school compound. Most of the students were still inside, busy with evening prayers or quietly resting. The air had grown heavier, as if the world had begun holding its breath. So they reached the toilet block. Don't imagine clean tiles or bright stalls. This wasn't a modern school bathroom. It was a separate structure, low-roofed and dim. A row of weathered doors, each leading to its old squat toilet cubicle. Inside each was a bucket and a scoop and not much else. The kind of place that echoes even when it's quiet. Nina stopped in front of the third door, the one she had locked earlier that day. And immediately, both girls recoiled. There was a smell. Not the usual dampness or mildew, but something far worse. Rot. as if something had died inside, a sour, choking stench that clung to the throat and made their stomachs turn. They covered their noses, eyes watering. Maybe a rat died, Nina muttered. She reached for the handle and opened the door. What she saw was not a rat. There, squatting on the damp floor, lit only by the faint light leaking through the high window, was a woman, or something that looked like a woman. Her gown, once white, was stained and crusted with dirt. Her long black hair hung in wet ropes around her face. Her limbs were long, thin, and moved with a kind of slow deliberateness that didn't feel human. She crouched in front of the bucket, holding something in her hand. Nina's eyes adjusted, and she realized what it was. Her pad, the one she'd left there, and the figure was licking it. The slow, wet sound filled the tiny space. The figure didn't speak, didn't startle. She simply turned her head slowly, like she'd already known they were there. Her hair parted just enough to reveal part of her face. Not all, just enough. A sliver of pale skin, one eye milky and unblinking, and the curve of a mouth that was no longer smiling. It was grinning. Nina's hand was still frozen on the door handle. Her friend stood just behind her, trembling. Neither of them could move. Their legs had gone numb, their minds blank except for one shared thought. This is not a person. Then the figure tilted her head slightly, still holding the blood-soaked pad, as if mocking them. She grinned wider. The air turned icy. The walls seemed to press inward. Her stomach dropped. Her skin turned cold. They tried to speak, to pray, their mouths opened, words spilling out, prayers whispered in desperation. Verses they'd remembered for years now returned to them like lifelines. But the figure didn't move. She just stood there, grinning and listening. When their voices finally gave strength, something shifted. The figure began to fade, not disappear, just dim, like a shadow pulling back into the cracks. And that was their moment. Nina yanked the door shut with a force she didn't know she had. They turned and ran through the corridor, past the washing area, across the courtyard, until they reached the safety of the dormitory lights. Breathless, they told the teachers everything. And when the teachers checked the toilet, there was nothing. No woman, no foul smell, just a single used pad in the bucket. Its color faded, its blood nearly gone. Since that day, Nina stopped brushing off those so-called silly rules. She didn't laugh at them anymore, because once you've seen something that isn't supposed to exist, you start wondering what else might be real too. This story has been retold across Indonesian forums and YouTube channels over the years, each version slightly different. But one message always stays the same: never leave your blood unattended, especially in places where old rules still breathe, because you never know who or what might come for it. Well, someone licking your used pad, ghost or not, is nasty. But anyways, that was one hell of a story, wasn't it? So, what about you? What stories does your town quietly talk about after dark? What rules did your elders pass down? And more importantly, which ones have you broken? Let me know in the comments, and if you've never experienced anything like this, that's okay too. Just be careful. Some things don't need belief to be real, only an invitation. Okay, that's a wrap for today. See you in our next episode. Good night, guys.